Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Third-Party Cyber Risk Management Best Practices to help you reduce supply chain risk. This event is brought to you in partnership with CyberGRX and our friends at Telstra Ventures. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the event. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. As always, we want these events to be educational, and we encourage your questions there in the questions pane. We'll be queuing up the best questions for our Q&A session at the end of the event and selecting one of the questions as our best question, which will earn a best question prize. I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. But first, I want to encourage you to check out the resources available for download there in your audience console in the handouts tab. We've got some excellent resources there for additional information. And at the end of the webinar, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found in the handouts tab as well. And as I mentioned, we also have our best question prize for an additional Amazon $50 gift card. Prize winners will be selected and contacted via email after the event. And with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to today's expert presenter. Welcome, Mr. Shane Hassert, Director of Assessment Operations at CyberGRX. Shane is an Air Force veteran and leads the team of cybersecurity professionals at CyberGRX to perform validation and verification for security assessments. Prior to CyberGRX, he led third-party and audit programs for global financial services, insurance, real estate, and healthcare organizations. He holds an MBA in project management and a Bachelor of Science in business management, as well as an associate's in intelligence analysis. He also has several security and privacy certifications. Shane, it's great to have you on the webinar today. Take it away.
All right. Let's briefly get started with some of the challenges and the background associated with third-party risk management. The Office of the Controller of the Currency, OCC 2013-29, was unprecedented as it superseded all previous guidance on the subject of third-party risk management. And making sure that you do a risk-based assessment of your third parties. Many of the large banks had already had a start on this by investing time and effort and resources into it. But the non-banking financials and the insurance companies who also fall under this particular regulation were the ones who needed to do some catch-up. And they've gone quite a distance in the last several years. Being in this space, and most of the third parties that we work with seem to have the same three challenges, and this may also sound familiar to you. The assessment requests are exponentially increasing over the past years as our digital landscape has intensified. However, qualified staff are in short supply and they're also expensive, making the requests by organizations harder to satisfy. From regulations to breaches, a rush to solve problems with more assessments seems to be the common reaction, which causes unrealistic expectations that assessment completion equals improved risk management, which we know isn't true. And adding to the assessment crunch, many companies are still looking for customization and are hesitant to accept standardized assessments, when in reality, most organizations are asking the same questions with a slightly different wording, which makes creating a database of responses nearly impossible. But as I said, most organizations are asking the same thing. So standardization should be at least an initial way to go. To round out the broken state of things, when compliance and auditory requirements are brought into the mix, strap teams are required to focus on more administrative work like data gathering, than being able to actually focus on the risk management activities that provide an actual return on investment towards risk reduction. These all lead to frustration on both sides of the table, the customer as well as the third party, and may slow down or impact deal flows altogether. The third-party ecosystem for businesses is changing. It's not this simple anymore, where there's a single service provider, a single organization, and a single customer. Digital transformations, global pandemics are pushing organizations, and organizations being pushed to reduce cost may have them moving faster than they had planned to. And organizations can only protect what they're aware of. For years, this gray area has been the third-party security controls. This looks a little bit more realistic of what today's relationships are, more complex and creating a web of services and relationships that need to be analyzed and managed. Supply chains aren't just for manufacturing, they certainly occur in software and service industries. As organizations and third parties find it more cost-effective and business-centric to contract out services like those that are not key business practices, removing hardware in favor of a virtual environment, and software and application development. And this brings us towards the nth party risk factor. Nth party risk is, so between the organization and their first service provider, that's their third party. If that service provider provides data to that software provider or the outsourced development organization, that becomes a fourth and fifth party to the original customer. We address this as nth party because it can go sixth, seventh, eighth, however far down the line. Most customer organizations do not have contractual language in place to audit the third parties of their third parties or the fourth parties. So you need to ensure that any data going to these nth parties is also protected by your third parties, and they should ensure the same down the line. As you can see by this diagram, the introduction of a threat, whether it be advanced persistent threat, ransomware, an actual breach, further down the supply chain can certainly affect upstream to you, your customers, and several of the other third parties that you associate and engage with. In 2019 surveys, it revealed that 55 to 65% of data breaches all stemmed from third-party relationships. Third-party risk is real, and it takes some skills to accomplish. Third-party risk practitioners need to have a well-rounded skill set due to the breadth of activities that they're involved in. Data gathering, analysis, and negotiation. All of these require a technical acumen, because they need to understand security a foot deep and a mile wide. They need to understand all the generalities of the security landscape, and they need to understand almost all of them and not focus into any one given tunnel. They need to have great communication skills, whether it be writing, speaking, and especially in listening, and excellent customer service skills, especially when they're negotiating mitigation activities or understanding competing priorities for organizations. It starts with context. You need to understand your business objective is where you want to start in understanding your exposure and developing a strategy on how to mitigate the risk. Some of these may seem like simple questions, but establishing this up front is a foundation of any good program. From an internal reflection, based on the goals, objectives, and missions of the company, why do you need to use the third party? How will we engage with them? How will our organization engage with the third party? What type of third party is best to use, whether we use the third party or whether we bring the services in-house? And why do we need to manage the risk? Is there a regulatory reason, a governance reason? Why do we need to manage the risk associated with the third party? Taking a programmatic approach, leveraging the business context will help you develop a framework that can drive your strategy. The life cycle should align with your business and third-party contracting or procurement process. Your third-party types will be categorized by risk profile, and we'll discuss that in a minute. and life cycles may be adjusted based on the third-party type. Much like a risk assessment, loss scenarios can be applied to and assessed for in different ways based on the third-party type as well. Many of the foundational components are obvious, but don't underestimate the power of a recognized third-party risk framework, which includes but isn't limited to the ISO control set, NIST 853, which has 1,000-ish separate controls, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which has just over 100 or so controls. And this is just to name a few to help you create that component for your assessment to review those third parties. The third-party risk management data stack should be thought of as a hierarchy. Each level can't be reached until the previous one has been met. So third-party portfolio management would have the greatest dissemination, but the lowest value of data. And we'll talk about this a little bit more depth in just a moment. With the inherent risk, because of the industry or the services, these are the risks that could be applicable to your organization. And we're really going to focus on the services that are being provided and talk about that in a little bit more detail. Then there's leveraging the control assessment, which is understanding what the third party has in place to help reduce that inherent risk. And finally, the residual risk. Once you understand the controls and the inherent risks, you can then take these final risks that potentially remain. Maybe controls are missing, maybe something wasn't captured by the control, and the residual risk would point those out and allow you to focus on those for areas of remediation or risk treatment. Classifying your third parties is understanding the risk to the business, which will help you determine the granularity of the assessment that you're going to conduct. One of the organizations that I worked with, and I've completed 6 or 7 of these different classification profiles, risk assessment, inherent risk assessment profiles. But one of the organizations wanted to know the data transport, how the information is going to get from the customer to the third party. The classification of the data or the data type, was it PHI, PII, NPI, classified, or public information? Is there regulatory risk? Is there geopolitical risk if it's an offshore type provider? Concentration risk was an interesting one when they brought this one to my attention. Do they have all of the services provided with one particular provider, or do they have it spread across 2 or 3, reducing the risk? It creates an increased security potential surface, but it's reducing the risk of if that one provider goes down, they have nobody else to do that particular service. Another aspect of the concentration risk is there only one organization that provides this particular service and you couldn't transfer it to another organization? Or are there several companies that provide this particular service? So if something were to fail with the one organization, it could be transferred in a reasonable and a cost-effective manner. Obviously, reputation risk. If an organization were to have a breach or were to go down, how would that affect your reputation? A lot of organizations, it's not as important to them that your third-party provider had a data breach. All they know is that your data is what was breached by that provider. And that's the reputational risk. The recovery time objective, operational, recovery point objective risk. Organizations may go down, and having risks associated with, if it's a PCI card provider, a payment provider, and let's say you're a casino, that payment provider going down for an hour could cost you millions. On the other side of that coin, it's a mailing provider and you're a insurance company. You may be able to go 24 hours without substantially recognizing significant decrease in revenue. So that type of risk is also one that should be addressed. And the relationship strategy. Are you going to be working with them for short term or long term? If it's long term, it's a little more risk because you're going to be continuing that relationship over a long span of time. Now, I use this upside down pyramid because it indicates the focus or granularity. And I like to use the metaphor of altitude on how these factors or how these factor into why you did what you did from an assessment perspective. So if they're low or nominal, end up as low or nominal risk to your entire organization, you can look at them from like a 10,000 foot level, 100 question assessment, review their policies, review their due diligence information, make sure they've got everything in line. Whereas if they are critical to your business functioning, you may want to have those 6, 7, 800 questionnaires because you really need to focus on if your business is at risk as a critical provider, you need to focus on making sure that their business will keep your business going. Going back to some of those data examples, the portfolio, the third-party portfolio, this is data that you can receive from public or subscription services. To understand the procurement due diligence of an organization, like I said, it's the greatest dissemination information, but has the lowest value of data. So it's, your name, how they work, how they spend, the number of employees, the company type they are, really kind of public type information. But that does help you set the stage for the inherent risk. When our organization, one of the organizations that I used to work with, what we did was we asked accounts payable to give us an entire listing because we really weren't sure of all the third parties in our portfolio. And this company, I actually worked both sides of the third party risk coin. So we were receiving requests from our 3,000 customers to perform security, to give them security information, as well as performing assessments on our 500 vendor pool. And how we got to those 500 vendors where we asked accounts payable to provide us a list of the previous year, all the payable accounts that were made, which came out to be about a 10,000 line spreadsheet. And working with procurements, we subtracted the one-time payments, the individual payments, the subscriptions, and a couple of other area values that we were able to subtract, which dropped us down to about 2,000 lines. Once we compressed those, it brought us down to about 800 vendors, of which we could follow up, which made it much more palatable and manageable of following up with the business units. We were then able to subtract about 300 more to come up with a list of 500 good vendors that we had. Now, understandably, a lot of much larger organizations, this isn't doable. But much smaller organizations, this may actually be a very good way to go with this. With the inherent risk, we've already kind of touched on that with the upside down pyramid, but this is because of the industry or the services, these are the risks that could be applied towards your organization. Specific focus on those services, because that's where you really want to see, what controls they have in place based on the services that they're going to be providing to you. The control assessment is understanding what the third party has in place to reduce their inherent risk. And then finally, the residual risks are the risks that potentially would remain. Some of the pro tips that I've learned over the years with some of these is that high spend may indicate high risk, but low spend does not necessarily indicate low risk. With that particular organization, we had a print service organization who was significantly lower spend than our data floor management location, but they were just as high of a risk because we were a mortgage company. So we absolutely had to consider that low spend as a significant risk. We had to consider the data rather than the spend. Let the inherent risk questionnaire drive the logic of the actual risk associated. As I demonstrated in the previous slides, classification is based specifically on the risk of the service being provided to you. And then finally, trust with the controls assessment. I'm a huge proponent of the trust but verify. Take a sample of some of the controls and ask your third party to demonstrate that they're in place. If you need to, if the risk is significant enough, and this is addressed in, if the risk is commiserate, go on site, review their policies, their documents, their procedures. Ensure that physical and environmental security controls are in place. Now let's look at the assessment, the analysis, and the treatment of the various types of risk. The assessment types that we can look at, the enterprise level assessments, which could and really should be standardized. These are the high level organizational decisions. So policies and organizational standards, HR policies like background screening, security awareness training, separation of duties, encryption, physical and environmental, possibly change management, things that business to business, service to service wouldn't change across the organization. This is where we spend the lion's share of our time with our standardized assessments, is in this enterprise level assessment. Because they are repeatable, they would go across to many other organizations and can be used in benchmarking and more advanced analysis because you're comparing an apple to an apple to an apple. Once you get to a service level type, these next two are really can lead to data overload because they're both custom assessments. So a service level type assessment are customized based on the service that's being provided, and they're really not reusable. This, unfortunately, unless you're comparing two exact same services, can lead to an apple-orange situation, comparing an apple to an orange situation. And like I said, it can lead to data overload because being a customized assessment, you have to go through and look at every piece of it and how every piece fits into your organization. Very similarly, product level assessments is similar to the service level. So I kind of had a good example with the questions listed here is, does the product support SSO? That's definitely a product question. But at the enterprise level, does the organization support SSO? So there could potentially be a tie-in. And then if we look at the implementation assessment, which should always be done between the third party and the organization and how integration takes place. Looking back at that SSO example, now our organization requires it. Your product currently doesn't support it. If it's something that's supported by your enterprise, is this something we can work together to implement and help to reduce the risk? So this is where that negotiation works together. The implementation assessment is always good because it helps pull out the gotchas between the third party and your organization and where something that may have been missed in one of the other assessments. The various analysis methods that can be used for looking at these assessments, it can be threat-based. MITRE ATT&CK has decades worth of red and blue data that's available, and it's free to use. There are several other frameworks available. I know Lockheed has another attack, or not an attack, but they have another threat framework and several other organizations. Those are very good starting places. Service-based, you need to know what to look for based on the services that are being offered. Another previous scenario of mine is we had a security company that I was doing a security assessment on. They wanted to be our third-party SIM provider. In going through their assessment, I found that they had developers on production. They had missed a lot of the actual security controls. So based on, if they had just missed a couple of HR controls or missed some of the policy controls, that may not have been as hard hitting as a security company missing basic security controls, which was the service they were going to be providing to us, was really kind of we needed to move forward with a risk treatment plan with them if we were going to continue to work with them. Standards-based. As I mentioned before, some of the standards that you can use that are very good out there, ISO, NIST, the NIST 853, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, FedRAMP, CMMC, those are all available to you for use in doing some of your analysis. And then custom. This takes a lot more knowledge and a lot more skills, because it also can lead to data overload unless you know what and why you're asking for a specific control information. You've really got to get down to the nuts and bolts of the analysis that you're putting into those controls assessments. And finally, risk treatment. The consideration, let's start with the consideration side. So you know your business must be engaged and they have to support you based on the treatments that you're going to recommend. What type of leverage do you have? Is it pre-contract so that you can force the third party to put something in place before you put the contract in place, or renegotiation? What is the organizational or the business unit's risk tolerances? And do you have contractual requirements and audit rights? Can you come back and review them in 6 months or a year or 2 years? And then we'll talk about the risk matrix, which I'm sure everybody's seen in just a moment. But when you've identified these particular risks, there are some things that you can do with them. You can avoid them, which basically you're telling the business unit you would recommend they not use them and avoid the relationship. You can transfer these, which is usually you're recognizing that the risk can occur. So you purchase insurance that if the risk occurs, you're financially covered to do what needs to be done to manage that risk. This particular treatment does not usually reduce your reputational risk, though. I'll make that known. Most commonly, you would mitigate or work with the third party to remediate the risk. And this is done via negotiation, setting real-time or setting realistic timeframes for correcting a risk. And finally, accepting the risk. This should not come from a security, procurement, or risk management team. Accepting the risk should come from a senior leader of the business unit that's wanting to engage in the service. If you've done your job correctly through this risk management, third-party risk management process, then that senior leader will understand the impact and the likelihood if the risk were to become real and put their name associated with it. And that what I've seen is a lot of senior leaders, if you've done your job and you've given them what the impact and likelihood are, they're not willing to put their name on it and will push back for the mitigate and remediation as far as they possibly can, because that's their job that's at stake. How CyberGRX is helping. We're changing the landscape for third-party risk management. When I came to the organization 3 years ago, I was very excited getting here because, as I mentioned, I was completing 1,000 in 2018. I completed 1,000 requests from our 3,000 customers. We had 3,000 customers. I completed 1,000 requests for due diligence information or security audits or insurance data sheets. And we were conducting assessments on our vendors as well. I really like the idea that it's helping both the customers, it's helping both sides of that third-party risk coin. The GRX in CyberGRX stands for the Global Risk Exchange. And like other two-sided marketplaces, our exchange was designed to bring together customers and their third parties. The concept is easy. We provide third parties with a single place to create a security profile on the exchange and then enable them to share with their customers as needed to ensure real-time risk management collaboration. So a customer orders on a third party, and here's another interesting part about the spider web that we looked at earlier. Several third parties are being used by several customers. So if they fill out one, they can then share that assessment with multiple customers. On the other side of the exchange, the customers can see their third party's security profile. They can analyze and monitor them against their own controls, and they work together on a risk remediation strategy. As you can see here, we've got the third party side and the customer side, and all the reports and analytics are releasable to then both organizations, the third party and the customers. With CyberGRX, you're in good company. We've got the largest cyber risk exchange in depth and in breadth. Right now, we have nearly 10,000 completed assessments that are already populated on the exchange. And with our predictive data, we have 125,000 organizations who have predictive data. And I will address what our predictive risk profiles look like. They're based on anonymized large data sets so that we can combine analytics and metrics to predict how an organization's profile may look with a percentage degree of certainty. This provides fast results for prioritization, compares against frameworks and attack models, and it gives the third party an opportunity to go and complete an assessment and see how they stack up against the prediction. As you may know, and this is the traditional approach and the life cycle that we addressed earlier in the programmatic approach. As you may know, our previous focus was centered on the assessments as a service, in which we would help you meet your assessment needs. This work was not without its challenges. We often found that 40% of companies would return the assessment promptly, 35% would take more time than desired, and 5% of organizations would refuse to participate altogether because we don't have the contract in place, the customer does. So we rely on the customer to help us move the third party through the process. While assessments are still part of our process, our new approach is centered around the ability to have a portfolio-wide view that lets an organization see, measure, and reduce the overall risk across their entire portfolio. So the customer benefits by no longer having to chase assessments, which returns them valuable time to analyze data and to negotiate risk remediation. The third party benefit is their ability to share a standardized assessment with multiple customers, reducing questionnaire completion, and hopefully getting them back to only focusing on areas that need focus. When I worked in this particular space not long ago, we would give organizations these standardized packages and say, please, they would send us the questionnaires, we'd send them the standardized package, and we would say, please review this. When you're done, let's talk about the deltas of information you didn't get. About 80% of the time, we would never hear from those companies again. About 10 to 15% of the time, they'd come back with a handful of questions stemming down from hundreds. And there were a few occasions where organizations would come back and say, no, we still need you to complete this entire thing and we still need to come on site. But the workload was significantly decreased and it really focused on more high value activities rather than the low value data chasing, data gathering. So in conclusion, knowing your business and how using a third party can and will affect your business. Develop the skills in data gathering, analysis, and negotiation. Consider the pluses and the minuses regarding the assessment, the analysis, and the risk treatment that you choose to apply, and consider utilizing an exchange. So thank you, and I'd be more than happy to take any questions at this point.
All right, great presentation, Shane. I learned a lot from you on that demonstration there and presentation. We do have some questions coming in for you from the audience. There's a lot of great questions coming in. I've just brought up a poll for everyone out there that's on the screen. It says, what additional information would you like about the CyberGRX solution? And we appreciate your feedback there on that poll. So let's see. First question that came in here. I see this one from Mitchell. Mitchell is asking, do you find that having an official audit or assessment such as SOC 2 or ISO 700 shorten the time to approval from third-party evaluation questionnaires? Shane, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so the easy answer is sometimes. Um, I absolutely, I think a SOC 2 is very helpful. I think an ISO 20, I'm guessing that was probably 27001 or 27002 controls, a 27001 audit, PCI DSS type audit, cybersecurity framework questionnaire, anything an organization can give me that gives me a first look at what their security posture is. With a SOC 2, I'm not going to look so much at the service description of it. I'm going to go straight to the testing matrices. I want to see what the auditor saw. I want to see what the auditor found. I'm going to look at any manager comments if there are qualified findings within that SOC. With the ISO, I'd like to see a statement of applicability. I want to see how it's applicable to the service that's being offered or being provided. So, any kind of a due diligence package that an organization can give. And this is one thing that, when we were getting asked to provide security information, we compiled a security package together. It was an audit. It was a verification from an independent third party. Uh, title pages and table of contents from all of our policies, our insurance form, and we would bulk it all up and we would send it to the organization and say, look at all this first. If you've got any questions afterwards, then we'll address the deltas. Some organizations we never heard from again, and a handful would always come back to us, but it would significantly reduce the time and effort that was required to go through just a questionnaire and provide the evidence and the documentation to everything that they're asking for.
Okay. Okay. Good advice. Thank you. And good question there from Mitchell as well. Let's see. Another question Jim is asking, how is the third party risk getting into the company? Email, network, what is the most penetrated?
So just by establishing a relationship with a third party, you've created that risk. Um, if you, I mean, you can send an Excel spreadsheet with NPI data to a third party. If that third party loses it, that's your reputation that's at risk because you provided it to them by having that relationship as a third party. So, I mean, it can get to your organization by any of those means that you listed. Um, but just by having that relationship with the third party, some level of risk has been established.
Got it. Okay. That's a good point. It might not be the traditional methods you think of, like a bringing up a network connection between two parties specifically. Just establishing that relationship creates the risk. So, good question. Another question here coming in. Scott is asking, what's the best practice for monitoring third parties? Many regulations call for active monitoring, but there's a limited control definition. What do you think, Shane?
Sure. So I always try to take it back to what's the risk associated with a third party. A lot of the industry right now, and I know Scott, what you're speaking towards active monitoring is also referred to as continual monitoring. That's very difficult to do with all but your most critical providers because the audit basically never stops. They want to know what you're doing all the time. And with most organizations, they don't get worse on security over time. Most organizations, if they have a security program in place and you've assessed them once and they're reasonably mature, they're going to continue getting better and adjusting to the cyber landscape as it adjusts. So the active monitoring or the continual monitoring, I don't know that there are many solutions out there right now or yet that are doing it really well. It's a very manual process. Um, I'm in favor of it, but with limited steps. You can't do it for all of your third parties. You've got to really pick out the ones that are the most critical.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Chris is asking, is there a limit to how often we can be assessed?
That's a great question. So typically, it's a contractual obligation. A lot of organizations will put in their contracts that right to audit is one time per year or one time per year with a follow up. They may even put on-site conditions within that contract that says you can only come on-site once, or we're going to charge back the time for you coming on site to spend with one of our resources. But it really depends. With the continual monitoring, that's something that would go on, for long periods of time. It would just doesn't stop. It continues and goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be really challenging, this idea of continual monitoring. Um, Larry's asking, how long does a typical assessment take?
Oh, that's a good question. It really depends on the assessment. With some of the low providers, they can take 2 to 3 days. To fill out a questionnaire, return the questionnaire, look at the evidence, and turn around with an opinion. With some of your more critical providers, you want to spend the time and really understand the business. Most of these are a point in time look at an organization. um, you want to be comfortable that when you're establishing this relationship with the third party, that it's something that you can continue over the long period of time. Many of the higher priority or the critical assessments that I've done in the past can take some upwards of 8 to 12 weeks each.
Wow. Okay. And that brings us, I think, to a good question here from Larry, who's asking, how often do you do a risk assessment of third parties?
Um, we typically look at our third parties on an annual basis, at least on an annual basis. The organizations can always come to us and, they've improved their security program. They want to give us more. They want to change some of the answers on their assessment. We can give those back to them and allow them to update those, maybe ask for evidence to show us that they've made these improvements um, on those security postures. But typically, for the critical providers, they're typically annual. Some of the high or medium level providers may be biannual, and the low providers may be every 3 years. It really depends on the risk appetite of your organization and the resources that you've got available to conduct the risk assessments.
Okay. Okay, good. Neil is asking, any advice on how to manage passwords, MFA, and other remote access to third parties?
Ooh, um,
It's a broad question, I know.
it is. It is. Remote access to third parties. If you make sure that they're following the same processes and procedures that your organization follows, and ensuring that they're protecting the data the same way that you're protecting the data, that's really the best advice I could probably give.
Okay. Okay. Good advice. Ned is asking, do you see CISOs readily embracing and implementing third-party cyber risk management within their organization, or is there some resistance in the field?
So security is notoriously one of those areas that's not a revenue generator. It's more of a cost center. So it's really convincing an organization that investing the money in the security is going to save the company when, not if, but when a breach happens. So a lot of the CISOs have been staying awake at nights because the third party risk has always been the gray area that they don't understand. Um, I know what my organization has in place. I know what I can control. Uh, the main focus behind the third party risk assessments and the third party understanding is now I can understand what you have in place and make recommendations or mitigations or negotiations on how you can better control data that I may be providing to you. Because the numbers of third party breaches continue going up, I think that it's coming more and more to the forefront of this in the CISO's eyes.
Okay, good. Good. I'm glad it's getting greater visibility. We all need to be better secure and I mean protect our data as well as it's stored, in multiple third parties.
Yep.
Um, let's see. Another question here. They're asking any feedback or ideas on the top cybersecurity threats to the supply chain in 2022?
Sure. I've got about two or three of them. Well, actually, three or four of them. One of them, and I believe we all probably experienced this one recently, is outages. If your third party goes down, are you a sitting ship on the water and can't do anything? Or what provisions or plans do you have for a backup or for those next steps to continue to keep your business going? Another one is non-compliance by your third parties. If they are all of a sudden hit with a finding letter by a regulatory organization or lose a certification, what does that mean to the relationship that you have with them? And then finally, just like with your organization, vulnerabilities or ransomware are very big topics right now. Organizations continue to get hit with ransomware and continue to get hit with vulnerabilities. I remember when Heartbleed and Spectre hit. Within a week, we had some of the larger banks coming and saying, "What are you going to do about these?" And the response was, "Well, the chip manufacturers don't even know what to do yet. There's no patch available yet. So as soon as we know what we can do, then we can roll out a more permanent solution. Until then, we'll do what as best as we can as far as removing these from the network or the system or the environment to help control the possible problems that could be exposed."
Okay. Okay. Good predictions there to watch out for. This is an interesting one here. They say TPRM has traditionally focused on the use of self assessment questionnaires that are static, questionably accurate, and non standard. What kind of innovations can we expect in TPRM in the future to address these drawbacks?
Yeah, I certainly hope that we can, because you're absolutely right. They have been Excel spreadsheets. They have been static. I hope they become a little bit more dynamic. I hope we can get to a point where there's a standardized set of questions. Organizations can answer those first, provide the evidence to support that shows, yes, we're saying we have this in place. I can show you we have this in place. And then something that's a little bit more customizable based on the solution. So it's kind of a hybrid between the standardized and the customized. So get into the service base because my focus has got to be following the data, following the security that goes with the data.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely. Let's see. It looks like we're starting to run out of time here in our webinar slot. We've got a lot of great questions. I think we've covered really all of them. There's some excellent resources in the handouts tab. I want to encourage everyone to check out the Forrester report is available for download right there. It is Why Isn't Your Organization Prioritizing Third-Party Risk? There's also the ransomware ebook. This is Ransomware and Third Parties, a comprehensive guide to protecting your organization. And then finally, there's the buyer's guide for rethinking third party cyber risk management. Make sure that you check out those resources. And of course, check out CyberGRX for additional information. We appreciate your feedback there still on the poll. Before we wrap up, it's on your screen. We want to hear from you. What additional information would you like about the CyberGRX solution? Shane, it's been really great having you on the event today. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation.
Absolutely. I appreciate you you having me today, David.
Absolutely great to have you. And of course, thank you to CyberGRX for supporting us, as well as our friends over at Telstra Ventures. I hope everyone learned a lot on today's webinar, and we'll see you next time. Before we go, though, I bet that there's someone out there interested in the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going out to Carolyn Horton from Tennessee. Congratulations. We'll also reach out to our best question prize winner as well. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.